All right, let's get into this discussion now. The Justice Ministry is warning against threats of a salary strike by some magistrates. The ministry says it's illegal for judicial officers to embark on industrial action. The group is threatening a strike, and it says magistrates have not received proper increases. However, not all magistrates are in favor of industrial action. So, to discuss this in detail, I'm joined in studio by the Justice Deputy Minister, John Jeffery. That's the gentleman on my immediate right. We're also joined by Neelan Karikan. He is from the Judicial Officers Association of South Africa. That's the gentleman in the middle. And then we are also joined by Ian Cox from the Regional Magistrates of South Africa, which is not in support of the proposed strike action. Gentlemen, to all of you, thank you very much for your time. Can I begin with you, Deputy Justice Minister? Why is it that judicial officers are not allowed to strike?
Well, they're judicial officers. The strikes, the right to strike and the procedures for strikes are in the Labour Relations Act. But judicial officers, judges, magistrates don't fall under the Labour Relations Act. The court administration has been declared an essential service. That's the staff working in the courts. That's in terms of the Labour Relations Act. Yeah. But there isn't any provision for judicial officers to strike. And there shouldn't be. And there was a landmark case, which is a Van Rooyen judgment, which was a judgment given by the then Chief Justice Arthur Chaskalson. And he had said specifically that in the judgment, judicial officers ought not to be placed in a position of having to do this or engage in negotiations with the executive over their salaries. They are judicial officers, not employees, and cannot and should not resort to industrial action to advance the interests in their conditions of service. Yeah. So it's just not appropriate. I mean, the other point we can get onto, but maybe I'll wait for more questions, is the process that is followed. Because they are independent, it's not the Minister of Justice who determines the salaries. It's not even the President. I mean, he does the final determination, but it's after recommendations by an independent commission on remuneration of public office bearers. Yeah. And that is headed by a retired judge. It's currently the retired Judge President of the Northwest, Monica Liu.
So let's come to you, Mr. Karikan. You represent the organization that is threatening strike action. What has forced you into this position in the first place, and how many people or how many magistrates do you represent?
Thank you for that. And I'm grateful to understand the position of the Ministry of Justice on this aspect. What's most important to understand, the Judicial Officers Association of South Africa, we have not called for a strike. What we've done is we have sought a legal opinion on the viability and feasibility of a strike. We've also engaged our membership nationally in terms of a ballot as to whether they would consider or mandate the organization to consider progressing with some type of industrial action. We've also sought their input as to what extent we should, as judicial officers, engage in litigation. Because remember, our sister organization, ARMSA, has already done so, and they are currently in the High Court. Now, that's an option that's always there, and the likelihood is JOASA as an organization, once we are privy to their papers, would potentially join them as an interested party in that process. But that's just one method of magistrates or judges of the lower court exercising their rights. What other option do they have? Because right now, what are we sitting with? We have the ministry present, engaged in this discussion. Who exactly is in charge and responsible for the lower court judiciary? Because we don't have the Magistrates Commission here today. We don't have the Independent Remuneration Committee, any member, or even Justice Liu, because that is the entity that we are complaining about. We don't have a representative from the Ministry's office, or either from Parliament, the select committee that we had written to, and in terms of the National Assembly. So who exactly is responsible for magistrates? Because when you speak about the judicial officers in the lower court cannot strike. Remember, it's a gray area. Previously, just over 10 years ago, the lower court judiciary and the JWASA in particular embarked on strike action. And there was a misconduct inquiry finalized through the Magistrates Commission. And ultimately, there was a judgment delivered that exonerated the leader of JWASA. And it was pointed out that there is no bar to magistrates striking, because in as much as we might not be employees in the true sense, remember, we are public office bearers. So what? At the end of the day, we were not appointed by the members of society generally. We had to apply. We had to go through interviews. If you want to take leave as a magistrate, you got to apply through your seniors, and there's a process. So if for all intents and purposes, we are workers in terms of the Constitution. And if you look at Section 23 of the Constitution, it's very clear. Yeah. And there's reference in this judgment. And it's very clear in the sense that magistrates, there is no regulation that clearly identifies that the magistrates don't have a right to strike. The Labor Relations Act does not protect us because we're not regarded as employees. Because quite easily that act could have excluded us from having the right to strike. Yeah. But we are not there. We fall under workers. It's a gray area. There's no legislation that excludes the magistrates from embarking on industrial action.
So quickly, before I move on from you, how many magistrates fall under your organization that are prepared to go on strike?
Koli, that's a lovely question. Currently, we have in excess of 800 magistrates that fall within the Judicial Officers Association of South Africa. And I want to add, we have High Court judges, it's a few of them, not many, that are members of JWASA. We have regional court magistrates that also belong to ARMSA, but a lot of them belong to JWASA. And then we got the bulk of the district court, the lower court, that belongs to JWASA. So we represent the complete spectrum of judicial officers in the country. We may not represent every individual, but we are fighting for their interests. I just want to add lastly, since the stance that the JWASA has taken, currently, old members that have left and new members that are joining us, we aim to have all 2,000 judicial officers in the lower courts to be members of JWASA, if that's what it means for us to achieve what we need to achieve.
Mr. Cox, let's come to you. You also represent magistrates, but you're not prepared to go on strike. So perhaps let's start with your representation. How many people do you represent, and why is it that you have a different stance from that of JWASA?
Right, firstly, ARMSA caters for regional magistrates only, because we are of the view that the district court magistrates, JWASA, and obviously the judges have different interests. So we have to cater for regional court magistrates exclusively. And it is so that some of our members have dual membership with JWASA, that is a fact, but they have dual membership. And we represent the majority of the regional court magistrates in the country. We have approximately 260 members, but remember, we are much fewer in number than the district court magistrates. Yeah. We are approximately between 300 and 400 permanent regional court magistrates, as opposed to a huge number of district court magistrates. Yeah. Why we decided to follow the litigation route instead of following the strike action is that we are of the view that striking or talking industrial action does not befit our profile, our status, and our responsibility to the general public on the street. We need to be accountable to them too. So what our angle is that if we approach the courts for a judgment, then at least we have something to go by. We have something that we can hold the IRC accountable by. Because the IRC are with all due respect, the huge culprits here. You know, they're not performing in accordance with their legislative duties.
Yeah, just to make sure that the viewer is on board, when you talk about the IRC, it's the Independent Remuneration commission, you're saying that that's the guilty party for not resolving this.
Correct. Correct.
All right. Deputy Minister Jeffery, let's come to you. This is about pay disparities, basically the difference between how much magistrates are paid versus what judges are paid. If I looked at the numbers, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, per annum, a magistrate is paid just slightly over $1 million, whereas a judge is paid 1.9 million. Why that disparity? Let's start there.
Well, there's different levels of judicial officers. So the main difference, and let me just say the regional magistrates, I think, are paid, let me just check, their salary level is 1,406,000. The entry level, the district magistrates are, as you said, 1,077,000.
Yeah.
Senior magistrates a bit more. But there's different functions that are performed. So, look, let's just say we've got over 2,000 magistrates. So when Mr. Karikan talks about having 800 members, it's 800 of over 2,000. So that's some way to go to have even majority representation.
Yeah.
But the difference with the judges is that high courts, well, the superior courts, are courts of where the judgments set precedents.
Yeah.
So basically, any other case in that province, if it's a high court judgment, has to follow that judgment. And another province should follow it. It's persuasive precedent. And then obviously if you go up to the Supreme Court of Appeal, all the high courts have to follow that. The Constitutional Court, everyone has to follow those judgments. The judgments of the district courts and the regional courts don't set precedents. So that's a fundamental difference. They're not making the law or interpreting the law, which somebody else then has to follow that interpretation as well, as is done with the high courts.
Yeah.
The other aspect then is that the magistrates' courts are creatures of statute. What they can do and what they can deal with is set out in legislation. The high courts have inherent jurisdiction, so they can deal with a wider range of issues. So those are two of the things. But let me just say, look, I would agree. There's too great a gap between what the magistrates are earning and the judges are earning. Incidentally, if you speak to a judge, I'm sure they will tell you they're also not earning enough. There is firstly, over the last 8 years, the increases that the magistrates have got have been about 13.5% more than the increases that the judges have got. If you look at them, and I can go through each year what each got, but the magistrates were awarded a higher percentage increase in a number of years than the judges got.
Okay.
But then also, the other point to make is that there is a review of the salaries of magistrates and judges. It's being done by the Independent Remuneration Commission. They've just completed it, although it's not been released. But I understand that the Lower Court Remuneration Committee, which is a committee that the Chief Justice had established, has had sight of the report, and both the president of JOASA and the president of ARMSA, I understand, are part of that Lower Court Remuneration Committee. So it is happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm pressed for time. I'm going to press you or rush you a little bit with your responses. I know you want to step in very quickly, Mr. Karikan.
Absolutely. Remember, as lower court judges, we don't want to earn exactly that a high court judge earns.
Right.
The amounts that we are talking about, they are very superficial. Remember, that is what the magistrate earns in total, cost to company.
But do you take on board what the Deputy Minister is saying? And that is that the magistrates have been getting slightly higher percentage.
I totally disagree. I totally disagree, particularly because now you made a comparison between magistrates and judges. Yes. Remember, we're not here to compare ourselves to high court judges. We don't take issue with their position. In fact, we believe that they should earn more.
Yeah.
But what you see in terms of figures is just the baseline. There are benefits that are beyond, from salaries for life and other types of remuneration, and benefits from car allowances, ex gratia payments after a certain number of years, not having to contribute to any pension fund, which magistrates do. So if you factor in what's there are hidden amounts that you don't see, and nobody wants to talk about it because they have received benefits similar to parliamentarians and other public office bearers, which magistrates have not received. Remember, we've only recently became public office bearers. We were part of the civil servants, and prosecutors have far surpassed us. When there's been cost of living adjustments, their increases has become higher.
Yeah.
So a magistrate that just comes into the system and a magistrate that's 20, 30 or 40 years in the system earns the same amount as the newly appointed magistrate. Does that make sense? But nobody wants to discuss the intricacies, and I think we need to get into that.
Well, do you want to get into those intricacies? Because magistrates, the frustration, you can see it on his face, they don't want to be the poor cousins of judicial officers.
Yes, I don't think that's going to change soon, unfortunately. You know, the bureaucratic system is so slow. We have been, for example, awaiting a bill which the DM is aware of since 2018, 2017, and nothing is happening. And similar to that is the IRC. The last major review took place 20 years ago. 20 years ago. In the meantime, the Van Rooyen case, as correctly pointed out by the DM, was actually prophetic in a certain sense, in that it that time already said that the fact that magistrates cannot take industrial action or are not supposed to makes them particularly vulnerable. What is our recourse? We have to go to the courts at our own cost. Nobody is paying for that.
Yeah.
We have to pay it from our own pockets. From 2017, the IRC has been promising us the major review is imminent, the major review is imminent. But that is but one of the aspects. I just want to touch on one last thing, and that is that each year the IRC has not been complying with their legislative duties. They have not complied with Section 8.5 and 8.6 of the Act. 8.5 says that they must look at our increments yearly, but we don't get it yearly. We still now, or rather last year's increment, has yet to be determined. It was supposed to come into effect on 1 April 2023.
Yeah.
That's not been done. We are now in 2024. 1 April 2024, this year's increment was supposed to be determined, and not determined, it actually should have been affected. It's not happened.
Okay.
And they don't speak to us. We don't know what's happening.
All right. Mr. Karikan, you want to quickly step in?
I'd like to step in. Thank you so much. Litigation is one issue, but we need to take much more bolder steps as judicial officers. We speak about jurisdiction. We appreciate the High Court as inherent jurisdiction and regulates their own proceedings. But their jurisdiction has filtered down into the regional courts and into the magistrates' courts. We have jurisdiction to impose life imprisonment in the regional court for premeditated murder. We control and we deal with and we enforce the National Credit Act, which gives us unlimited jurisdiction. We are dealing with divorces, you know.
Yeah.
So, and Paja and Paya and holding power to account. The magistrates' courts are dealing with it. And we are even dealing with constitutional issues. We've got equality courts in the district court, in the regional court, and also in the High Court.
Yeah.
So when we want to draw this distinction between the lower court judiciary and the High Court judiciary, we must be very careful. What specific duties or functions do you perform apart from creating precedent? Remember, the High Court themselves, High Court matters flow from the magistrates' court, goes on appeal, and ultimately could end up in the Constitutional Court. And they can confirm magistrates' court's decision. So what does that tell you? And that judgment of the High Court, when it's concluded and goes on appeal to a higher court, they create precedent for themselves, for the High Court judges. So that argument about precedent, I think it doesn't hold water. We need to move beyond that and really look at the core issues.
Okay.
Can I come in on that? I mean, just look with due respect, with regard to the last point. You need to read a High Court judgment because it's going to be followed, has to be followed. The judgments of the district courts, the regional courts are important, but nobody is going to have to follow them in the district court, in the regional court.
You're talking about case law now.
in terms of case law.
Right.
And then the issue of inherent, I mean, what I had said was the magistrates' courts are completely creatures of statute. Statute has to, the laws of the country have to determine what they can do and not do, whereas the inherent jurisdiction is that if there's no law, the High Court can actually determine that case. But I think my other concern from what Mr. Karikan has said is that he raised right in the beginning who exactly is responsible for the magistrates. Now, I'm not sure how you can ask that question because I mean, the head of the judiciary is the Chief Justice of South Africa. I'm not sure if you've gone to him. The Ministry of Justice does not set your salaries. The Magistrates Commission is not involved in your salaries. They are responsible for your disciplinary action. And incidentally, in terms of the earlier incident which you mentioned when the then, I think, President of JOASA had been calling for people to strike, and he wasn't at work on the day of the strike, but he'd actually taken leave, so he wasn't striking. And that is why nothing happened in the Magistrates Commission. But look, you've got, well, firstly, the magistrates fall under the judiciary, under the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice has established a lower court remuneration committee, of which both these gentlemen are part of, and receiving reports and interacting with the Independent Remuneration Committee. Right. The Independent Remuneration Committee is chaired by a judge, a retired judge. So those structures are there. And then, as I said, as far as the overall review of the magistrates' and judges' salaries, that has been done. Yes, they've taken a bit longer than I think they should have, but that's been done. And you know that. You've seen the report.
All right, gentlemen, we have to take a break. I know there is impatience, but we have to move the conversation forward. If you're just joining us, we're still in a discussion about magistrates who are frustrated with their pay and they're now threatening strike action. And still with us is the Deputy Justice Minister, John Jeffery. Neelan Karikan is from the Judicial Officers Association of South Africa. That's the organization that's threatening to strike. And we also have Ian Cox. He's from the Regional Magistrates of South Africa. They are not in support of strike action. Let's come to you, Mr. Karikan. So, as I mentioned before we went on a break, this has been boiling over since 10 years ago now, and the Deputy Minister is asking the question, where exactly have you gone then to try and get this salary issue resolved? Have you been to the Chief Justice?
Thank you so much. Actually, it's been much more than 10 years. But let's just deal quickly with the Department of Justice and their position and responsibilities. It's very important for us to really appreciate our Constitution, and particularly Schedule 6 of the Constitution, that requires the ministry or the minister, in the form of the Minister of Justice, to actually progressively realize the fast-tracking and implementation of aspects relating to the judiciary. And that includes the implementation and creation of a single, unified, integrated judiciary.
Yeah.
Why are we falling under the Department of Justice? Why are they administratively controlling 95% of the judiciary? Because that's what we are. We are 95% of the judiciary doing 95% of the work. Why has the Office of the Chief Justice, and the Chief Justice particularly, taken ownership of us? Therefore, our colleagues refer to us as stepchildren within the judiciary. Because why are you calling us the magistracy when we are part of the lower court judges and we should be part of the judiciary? And that in itself, you must understand, we need to go to the Department of Justice when we want services, we want pens, we want court staff, support staff. We don't go to the Office of the Chief Justice. And then when you speak about we should actually be responding to the Chief Justice, we've written to the Office of the Chief Justice and the Chief Justice himself, just as we've written to the Ministry's office, to the IRC, the Presidency's office, and including National Assembly, which has responded to us. And that has actually initiated this whole process. I've been proceeding throughout the country having interviews, and the public at large, they're surprised and shocked. Is this the state of the lower court judiciary? And we say that we are moving and we want to have proper, effective constitutional democracy in terms of the legislature, executive, and judiciary. But we don't have that.
So can I quickly ask you this before I move on to Mr. Cox? You've sought legal opinion on whether or not you can go on strike. Have you received a response as to whether or not you can do this?
We are still finalizing that opinion, that legal opinion. We are still finalizing feedback. We should get feedback by tomorrow, but we should be collating the ballots from our members nationally and even our non-members. Mind you, we have not sent it out just to JWASA members. Every judicial officer, including acting magistrates, and we have a ton of them, and that's one of the deficiencies of our system. We have people that are not being appointed permanently. We have magistrates that are about 300 of them that are just acting.
Okay. Mr. Cox, a little earlier, you said it would not be a good image to see a judicial officer in the streets shouting slogans and what have you. So the question is, therefore, what would the impact of Mr. Karikan and the people he represents going out to the streets to protest for salary increases?
Well, it depends how the authorities actually view that. We don't know whether, if they run in the streets, proverbially speaking, I'm not saying that that is what they're going to do. They're talking industrial action, which is something, it can be anything, and they're talking strike. Nobody said that they were going to run in the streets as such. But I don't know what the impact really would be. You know, it would tarnish our profile and status, I think, as magistrates. And as it is, we don't have in some corners of the public a good picture, or they don't have a good picture of us. And the whole thing is that the IRC need to be accountable. Somebody has to hold them accountable. And who is that? Who's holding them accountable? Is that the Parliament? Is that the Ministry? Is duty to do that? Is it the OCJ? There's no clarity on that. The fact is that it appears that the IRC can do as they please. They embarked on the latest major review in 2017. We were promised a report at the end of 2019. That never materialized. And the DM said that they are in communication with us. It's not true. They are supposed to be in communication with the LCRC, but for a period of 2 years, from 2019, October, up to 21, they refused to speak to the LCRC. There was no communication. Pursuant to that, we, as ARMSA, engaged a legal team, and we had our lawyers write to them, because the LCRC does not have locus standi. We have locus standi. We can sue and be sued, but the LCRC cannot.
Right. Deputy Minister Jeffery, who does the Independent Remuneration Commission answer to?
They're appointed by the President, and they make recommendations, though, to... Nobody determines their own salary. So remember, what we're dealing with here is the magistrates, which are one part, but they also deal with the salaries of judges, of the President, ministers, deputy ministers, members of Parliament, provincial legislatures, local government councillors, the Chapter 9s, and traditional leaders. So they then will make a recommendation to whoever on the magistrates and judges. They would consult with the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Finance. They would make a recommendation to the President, who would then make a determination based on that recommendation, and then that has to be approved by Parliament.
It's a long list, Minister.
It's a long list.
It's a long list. It doesn't tell us exactly who this body is accountable to, because they're being blamed for why the magistrates are where they are.
They're called the Independent Remuneration Commission for the Remuneration of Public Office Bearers, so they are independent, as they should be. It would be for different role players, the judiciary, to say, we think you're taking too long, and that's something that the magistrate should take up with the Chief Justice. It would be for other role players. Parliament can even say a word, have a word or two as to the performance if there are problems with that. I just also wanted to address what Mr. Karikan said about the judicial officers, whether they're judges or magistrates, are not employed by the President or by the Ministry of Justice or the Department of Justice.
All right.
Court administration is handled by, in the superior courts, by a department called the Office of the Chief Justice.
Okay.
And that's a bureaucracy. The magistrates' courts the administration is done by the Department of Justice. But that is not the judicial officers. The judicial officers, the magistrates and judges are independent. They do not account to the Minister of Justice or the Deputy Minister. And if there are problems with them, those have to be dealt with by the Magistrates Commission.
I've got to tell you, since this conversation started, I'm not any clear as to whether this is going to be resolved anytime soon. So you tell us your thoughts.
Thank you so much. I think we all can appreciate here that the IRC is the responsible body. It's a constitutionally created body that all the role players want to pass the buck onto. We've engaged with them. They don't listen to us. There's no real consultation. And when we meet with them, they just give us a report that's irrational, doesn't make sense. And the powers that be, it has to be maybe the ministry's office, the commission, the office of the president, the select committee of justice and security. They need to exercise oversight over this constitutionally created body. But nobody does it. Now we need to go between Mr. Cox and myself and Juasa and Aramsa. We must go to court to insist that they do their job. We go to parliament and they say, take them to court. Right. How can that be? It cannot be. So we are at our wits' end, colleague.
Mr. Cox, I want to come to you because you have said something about the image of the judiciary, if indeed this does come to a head, that judicial officers go on the streets. But I want to bring a different spin to it. The conduct of magistrates, at least of some magistrates, I shouldn't paint everyone with the same brush, it has been found wanting. There are magistrates who have not behaved in the manner in which the law expects of them to do, particularly given that they're the ones who enforce this particular law. So why should South Africans be sympathetic to your call for salaries to be increased when there are some officers who are going to conduct themselves in that fashion?
Oli, I want to emphasize what you just said, some officers. You know, any organization has their proverbial rotten apples. I mean, we can go from the top, and we don't need to point fingers right to the bottom of the organizations. I mean, within the government sphere, etc. Everybody's got their rotten apples, but the important thing is how you deal with that. And we're not hiding it. There are naughty boys out there, and girls for that matter. But that's why the commission, the Magistrates Commission, have the ethics division, and the ethics division is the body that actually check up on those people. Yeah. And they are brought to book. Investigations are done, and eventually there are hearings that's done, and the ones that are very naughty, they are being removed from office.
Okay, Mr. Karikan?
It's very clear as to when you deal with the conduct of judicial officers. You have the judges have their own committee through the Judicial Service, and you've got the Magistrates Commission. And they have a very precise function, just as we in the courts. And remember, the Chief Justice has created norms and standards the way we run our trials, from inception to end. There's timelines. So if the commission is seized with a complaint, what excuse does the commission have to have complaints sitting with them for 6, 7 years and not finalized? And each year that the magistrates are talking about increases and basic increments, COLA, cost of living, then they bring that up. You'll notice every department wants to talk about it. And if you look at the people that they are talking about, it's the same people, year in and year out. You know, it's the same 4 to 5 people maybe. And remember, I'm not getting into the merits of the case. They must do due process. If the parliament wants to remove or suspend, they must do that.
Yeah.
So if you don't do that, let's not talk about magistrates having misconduct, because if you look at our number, we're a few. And if you're talking about 3, 4, 5 people, really? And I want to add, magistrates that are exonerated and cleared, They don't get a courtesy letter, even from the commission, to say, you've been cleared and whatnot, because we receive complaints every day.
Yeah.
And when it's escalated, people get exonerated, but they're left in the air, they are left hanging, their careers are stopped,
Yeah.
and doesn't make sense. So the commission is responsible, nobody else.
Deputy Minister Jeffery, you get to have the last word here. The name of the judiciary, it's been dragged through the mud at times by politicians, conveniently at times, in order to suit their own agendas. But when you are going to have a situation like this, where judicial officers go on the streets because of pay, but at the same time, you have the South African public reported to them by the media that there are the conduct of judicial officers at times is found wanting. Case in point, you have 2 judges this year that were impeached. First time in South Africa's democratic history. Is the judiciary slowly going over the edge? Is the image of the judiciary in South Africa slightly going into crisis mode?
I don't think so. There's, I think it's about 200 judges, just over 2,000 magistrates. So it's a small number of wrongdoers. The reason that it took so long for the 2 matters which led to an impeachment or impeachments was because there were a lot of challenges to the process. If there are cases like that again, it won't take so long.
How can you guarantee that?
Well, because the rules have been effectively established with all the litigation in those cases. And similarly with the Magistrates Commission, magistrates have been suspended and removed on a number of occasions, but it's a small minority.
Yeah.
I think, yes, the problem is that people who, particularly from political parties, if you don't like the judgment, then the court is captured and it's biased. Obviously, if the court rules in your favor, it's a completely different story, and people need to be more mature and accept the judgments that are coming from the courts. If you don't agree with them, then appeal against them.
All right, gentlemen, last thoughts, and very briefly, I'm going to be a stickler for time here. Where to from here?
Thank you so much, Collie. Collie, we're going to get feedback from our membership of JOASA, and we're going to watch the space. We want to see to what extent the Ministry of Justice is going to come to the party and engage and assist us to reach out to the right role players. We expect parliamentarians to do so, and the public at large to actually support a strong, united judiciary.
Mr. Cox?
We will trust the legal process with our litigation that we've embarked on, and we also trust that someone, whoever that person or persons or body may be, may hold the IRC accountable for what they are not doing.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time.
Do I not get a last word?
Very briefly.
Okay, please, yeah, thanks. Look, I think that we sympathize with the magistrates, but industrial action would be wholly inappropriate if that happens. I think the problem is that the Independent Remuneration Commission is an independent body. Independent means you don't account to, you haven't got a boss. You can then engage, I mean, there should be engagement with other people. I would urge the magistrates to engage with the Chief Justice, because the Chief Justice is the head of the judiciary, but hopefully calm heads and good sense will prevail.
All right, gentlemen, I'm completely out of time. Mr. Karikan, I can see that finger. Unfortunately, we can't. Okay, that's where we're going to end this discussion. Hopefully, you have a sense of what's going on. Well,